Hello, you beautiful internet you, and welcome to a very special edition of World Building with your favorite host, DM Dave. As you can see, I have some very special guests with me today, but we'll get into that in 1 second. Before we begin, just want to do my usual beginning of wherever you are in Streamland. We're wishing you a very good morning, good evening, or good afternoon. So, what the hell are we doing today? Why are there so many people at my writing desk? Well, today we're going to be doing a special world building panel, and I've brought in the most amazing people that I could find on short notice to talk to me a little bit about world building. So these studly individuals that you see around me, we'll do a quick little introduction to everyone here. So, first and foremost, to my immediate right, we have Mike, who is a very special guest of ours coming to us from the GaryCon team itself. Mike is the community manager over there and longtime DM, longtime world builder. Mike, thank you so much for joining us today.
Happy to be here.
We also have directly below me Jasper of Voidcast and Jasper's Laboratory. For those of you who don't know and aren't already following or subscribed to Voidcast, I highly recommend it. Jasper's Laboratory is a great resource for any kind of new DM starting into the hobby. He will help you go through adventures, encounters, anything along those lines, and kind of show you specifically how to build things around that. As always, coming from across the pond, and I know it's a little late for you, so Jasper, thank you so much for joining us today.
Such a pleasure to be here.
And last but not least, a very good friend of Careful Cantrips is TopDownTabletop, and the DM Shanks from that wonderful group over there. They do a wonderful job in recreating a wizardly type world, and I thought it would be great to have him on and kind of get some insights into his ideas behind world building as well. So Shanks, thank you once again for joining us today.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me.
Anytime. So, just to those in chat, because I can see it going very quickly, we will be taking some questions from chat as we go along. We'll probably save those to the end of the, closer to the end of the panel. But if you do have questions about world building, about virtual tabletop gaming, anything along those lines, feel free to throw that in chat, and we'll try and address it as quickly as we possibly can. All right, so let's just kind of break into the brass tacks of it, gentlemen. Let's get to the point of why we're all here in the first place. We've all been DMs for a while, quite a few years for some of us, I'm sure, and we all know how much official material is out there, specifically from TSR and Wizards of the Coast. And for whatever reason, whether it's be complete narcissism or masochism or a little bit of both, we've decided at some point in our lives, you know what, I don't care about all of the fleshed out specific materials with years and years of content behind it. I'm gonna do this myself. So I'm gonna turn it over to Mike to start us off today. Mike, why do we start world building? What is it about the allure of building our own worlds that kind of pushes us towards that creative element?
Honestly, I think world building for us all comes from a place of wanting to be the writer, wanting to be the creator, and maybe a little bit of self-grandiose ideas. But I think that we all know what our ideal is in the head, and we want to give it to other people. We want to be able to share the idea with other people. However, writing is hard. I've got about a dozen unfinished books, and world building allows me to, and this is something I'll probably say 1,000 times, so it's collaborative storytelling, because sometimes I don't know what's going to happen next until my players give me the impetus to go there. And it's kind of that you see a meme every so often on the internet, which is, ask me anything about my homebrew world, and if I don't know the answer, then you're just helping me build it. And that's kind of a big part of what world building is that the idea of discovery together as we all create something.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Shanks, what about you? What really got you into world building?
Oh man. I guess I've always been a little bit of a world builder. Even as a child, you read things like The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and so many other medieval fantasy style books, and you ask yourself all these questions that you can't ask the author, like, well, if this is the way things are, what else is going on in this world? And so with my friends, we'd always come up with these crazy theories and what we believe is going on. And as I grew older, without entirely growing up, I continued to do this sort of thing even as I played D&D. And we had, before I started this Wizards of Zakaria campaign, we had about 3 or 4 other campaigns going in the Forgotten Realms. But of course, it was my version of the Forgotten Realms, and even though it took place in various different places at different times, to me they were all the same world, with multiple moving parts, and every decision that the players made influenced that world. And the more I got comfortable with that idea, the more I thought, what if I just started from scratch?
Sorry, I was gonna say. I mean, that's that you brought up a very interesting point. So many times when I'm talking to new DMs, new world builders, anything along those lines, they think that they have to build a world from absolute scratch. Starting from the very top of the cosmos down to what ants look like. When in reality, I think there is a wonderful tool that people don't utilize as much, where they can take parts of a campaign setting that already exists, say for example the Forgotten Realms, and really just carve out their own little piece of that. There's going to be some people at your table who they might get a little upset because they do have the history and know that kind of knowledge and lore that's within the Forgotten Realms space, but I think that you can utilize those players really well to help you along the road, to say, hey, I'm carving this little section out for myself. If there's things that I'm missing or I'm forgetting, please help me with that kind of stuff. What about you, Jasper? What really got you into the whole world building? I know you've been playing D&D, probably one of the longest individuals I've ever met. I think you've been playing since first edition came out, or pretty close to it.
Yeah, I did the Red Box. I started with the Red Box when I was 11, and it was a Dutch. It had a Dutch translation, so that's why I started there. And then once we could read English quite well, we went to not the third edition Dungeons and Dragons books, as I called it, so the second iteration of the second edition books, and then we really went from there. But the first thing was, I was inspired by the way those booklets drew me in, and then I just wanted to tell stories myself. And I think that through the years I've had a lot of phases where it meant different things for me to start building worlds and to be a dungeon master. I think there has been a bit of egoism in it. There's been a bit of sadism in it, masochism surely, because sometimes preparation takes a lot of time and a lot of dedicated hours that you can't do anything else. And but in the end, it's the cooperative gaming experience and the storytelling that makes me want to do this for years and years after this show. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that's the short of it, but there are a lot of details, of course, which I could elaborate. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think that the red box or the little brown booklets, we all look at those kind of as the first edition Bible, if you will. That was the original King James of D&D. And what Gary did was really incredible in terms, if you've actually read through any of them, he doesn't really give a lot in terms of the world centered around it or anything along those lines. The originals were very much hey, here's the mechanics behind it all. Drop your players in front of a dungeon and really get into the dice rolling at that point, which made sense for the time, because, you know, you need to work out the mechanics of a system regardless of what it is. So, you know, having that ability to fine tune. What I always found interesting from those booklets is how would a DM really convert that into a world of their own? What inspirations are they taking in order to really start fleshing that out and build a world around it? And I know, mind you, it was very different from edition to edition. Obviously, first edition wasn't so focused on things like role playing and lore and everything along those lines, versus where we're at today in fifth edition, where you would argue that, you know, role play and the lore and everything along that is pivotal to the overall gameplay. Jasper, where do you generally take your inspiration from when you're really looking at, okay, I've got players, I'm interested in this whole world building thing, I want to get started first, but how do you pick, specifically the inspiration behind what your world is going to be for that particular campaign?
I think that's a combination. It's from what is there already, it's from fantasy, and it's from logic. The first campaign I really started making was called Dark Earth, but I started making, I did some mapping, I think, and had a couple of villages drawn out, but then I started doing the second edition Dungeons and Dragons The Night Below adventure, which is an adventure that some people like Matthew Colville can do in like half a year, but it took me 8 years to play through that module with every week, playing every week for 8 hours. So I don't know what the difference there is, but it might be saying something about how I build my worlds and and do the role playing stuff, because it's just free booklets in there, right. And then if you start with a module, then you have to start thinking of, okay, but this module is set into a certain world. What are the rules of this world? What is around this Heronshire province that's described in this adventure? And then you start filling that in. Then you get a pantheon with it, because I'd use some Greek mythology with an evil, the scented god as well. And then we start building from there. But what I really like about all these things, because you always get inspired by the fantasy books you read, is that at a certain point, logic starts taking over, and you start really realizing, okay, for an economy to function around this province of Heronshire, there must be these trade routes, there must be this logical exchange between people for it to become a realistic, fantastic society. And that's what inspires me to start building worlds. And then for my second world, I took all that information and started from scratch, as you said.
Yeah, that's generally how it goes. It's funny thinking back to exactly where it all began. I remember very vividly and with much compassion behind it, as horrible as it was, the first world that I built. Mike, do you remember your very first world that you built, whether it be in D&D or just in general?
Yes, absolutely. So this is gonna take. I first started playing D&D in second edition, but the first world I built was actually in White Wolf. In the mid '90s, it was very popular. Vampire the Masquerade, like live action role playing game, and there were no modules for LARPing, so we ended up just creating worlds. And at first, LARPing back then is nothing like what it looks like now. It was mostly just a bunch of angsty teenagers walking around and either trying to fight each other or date each other. It was very weird. But one of the things that set everything apart was it was having to create a world on the fly and improv, and then keep it all straight in my head. And I honestly have no idea how I did it at like 15. But what I found is that I let my friends and the people around me, I let their interests guide me and what I was creating. And it was almost feeding off of their excitement, fed into my excitement. But I had to learn very quickly where to draw the lines of, this would be cool, however, we can't do all the things. And I really wanted to when I was first building a world. But then as I grew and as I saw the effects of it, I was able to do resets and things like that. And you just end up creating it takes time to find your balance between what you want, because you want to add all the things, versus what is actually like usable, what is playable. Because if everybody can do everything, is there any point in growing? And a big part of world building is leaving room for growth for the characters, room for discovery, and honestly giving them something that they want to come back to and have more of.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you in terms of it's very tough when it comes to being the world builder behind everything, and especially when you kind of latch on to something that people really like, because you do want to give them everything all at once, but you do have to always be considerate of the burnout that centers around it. No matter how old you are, I mean, your brain can only process so much and create so much at one given time, and it's also difficult to really define the scope of what you've built and make sure that, okay, does it all make sense still? Can I make this all canonical? So I absolutely understand. And I gotta say, doing it in a LARPing setting, that would be, I don't think I've ever seen that. Did you actually build props and everything along that for the kind of set pieces or something similar to that, or?
MacGuffins mostly.
Okay.
We would build MacGuffins. For example, one time we had a one-night event where they had to decode the clues to find the bomb before it went off, and that was gonna, the thing. Go find the thing, find the people who know about the thing, or set the thing, and chase it down. And that was it was stuff like that. But mostly we just built off each other, and people got excited, and they'd bring props, and I can't tell you how many times I almost ended up arrested because of it. So.
Well, you're saying it's the
you got a bunch of people
90s,
walking around a park in the suburbs looking for a bomb. So I mean,
yeah.
I could just imagine, especially in the early to mid 90s, all these individuals looking like they're extras from the movie The Crow, walking around, the middle of Chicago or Wisconsin. I could see where that would be a little bit of a problem. Shanks, do you remember?
Yeah, suburbs outside of Chicago weren't fans.
Right. Shanks, do you remember the first world that you built?
Honestly, no. We're talking so long ago. I remember the first one that I really tried to put down on paper, and I think I was so dead set on being original that it ended up being so overcomplicated that no one was ever going to read this book. I got about 3 chapters in and I went, no one's going to have any idea what the hell I'm talking about. And then I realized, you know what? It makes more sense to fall back on a lot of the tropes that people understand and then build out unique and meaningful interactions from there.
Right. I think you're absolutely right in terms of all that. For anybody in technology, that's how I kind of look at world building, is kind of build it from an agile perspective rather than the waterfall development method, where it's kind of find bite-sized chunks, build in small pieces of the things that you need, and kind of expand on it from there. And that actually gives a great segue into what you guys' opinions on, in terms of how do you actually start? Once you've actually, so let's say you've decided, I'm going to take on this masochistic task of trying to build a world that's concise and somewhat makes sense to the rest of my players to a certain extent. I've got a little bit of the inspiration of what I want to do. Where do you go from there? How do you actually sit down and start writing it? Jasper, why don't you start us off with that?
Well, you started off with the wrong person, Dave, because I recently started doing my show Jasper's Laboratory, especially to learn other people how to build an adventure. And of course, there's a bit of world building involved in that as well. But both my worlds are mainly in my head. I am that guy that can remember everything. And then, so there are these 2 worlds in my head. And of course, I do put some stuff on paper, but that's more for session preparation than the world itself. And recently I've discovered that I have forgotten things that I designed 20 years ago because some parts of it are more lively for my player characters than they are for me. Like this guy said, "Oh, do you remember when this girl came into the ethereal plane and yanked me to this place?" And I said, "What are you talking about? I can't remember that at all." So that's where I might start deciding to put stuff to paper. But in general, my campaign setting is in my head. My session prep is on paper, in some regard, or digital paper by now. But and then notes can be found in between. What was when I was a teenager in my booklets, school booklets, and then later on notes between stuff I had to do in university. So if I get my math book out, then there's a half a campaign written down somewhere, but I threw those away, so they are lost again. And it's only in these times when I'm still in my 30s that I really start. I've started to put stuff on paper, that's how I do it. But I know all the names of all the gods. I know where everything is. I know the continents. I know the important people. I know the history going 30,000 years back and everything of 2 campaigns. And that's how I do it.
Man, and you only have a little bit put down on paper. I don't know how you remember your children's names. There's no way. If I had 2 campaign settings in my head at any given time, I'll tell you what, there'd be no way I'd have any more room for anything else going on in there. Do you generally use any of the new online tools that are out there for world building? I know there's a lot starting to crop up. The world anvils. There's a lot of people talk about using Microsoft Notes. That's another big one that I see out there, or the Evernote, I think it's called. Jasper, do you ever use any of the online tools?
Only things like the stuff like the home brewery to build up your because the things I do, I make classes and everything and races, and I do make those and make them official in some regard. And then I know I use these templates like programs on the internet that make them look like official Dungeons and Dragons content. So I use them, but mostly mapping out my adventures. I mostly either draw my maps by hand because I like the way that looks. I don't dislike the digital versions, but I just like drawing them by hand and using black ink and everything. And Google Sheets.
Yeah, always a good one for Google. Google has tons of stuff. I'm not sure about the Google Docs yet, and just in terms of how all of that works. But I mean, Google Drive is great for sharing amongst yourself and other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And because what I found, and that is why, because you're what is it called, World Anvil. You're using that, right, Dave? That's pretty handy because you can access that everywhere, and that's the main thing that I have realized by now, that I lose stuff in different programs, even on my computer, and then I go to another computer and I can't find it anymore, and that's why I just like Google Drive that much. But you can of course use all these other kind of external programs that do specific stuff for you. Like I really like what you're doing on your world building show and using those programs to make it comprehensible what you're doing.
I appreciate that.
I mean, I think.
I've actually moved away a little bit from World Anvil for the most part. The thing that I like most about that specific tool, and just for anybody who's watching, we're not sponsored by World Anvil. I'm just a big proponent and supporter of it. Is the fact that they give you the templates to begin, and I think that's a huge element of when you really start to sit down and write anything. If you can develop prompts over time for yourself, World Anvil is a great example. For any of those those who are doing world building, highly suggest just signing up for it for even a day. It's completely free in terms of usage, but just take a look at how you would start articles on there. They give you very specifics, templates that you can use for whether you're developing a character, a landmark, or anything along those lines. And it will spur your writing very, very quickly in terms of what you want to do. And now I've kind of moved away from that a little bit and started to do my own templates around that and try and utilize that with my world building things. But in terms of just that mass amount and the whole idea of moving D&D from pen and paper to ones and zeros, I guess, Mike, what kind of stuff are you using in terms of technology, if you're using it at all, and how do you really start your world building process?
Well, Jasper says he may be the worst at this, but I aim to top him.
You go.
First off, one of my players is in the chat, and he probably is going to keep me honest on this. I don't world build very well at all, mainly because I work on an improv model, and for me, gaming is ethereal. It's something that we do it happens, and the play occurs, and people will remind me of stuff. And sometimes I remember, sometimes I don't. And usually both instances, I'll say, okay, yeah, we can work with that. Oh, thanks for reminding me. And then we will do something with that. I used to keep notes on Google Docs. We play our game on Google Sheets, or not Google Sheets, sorry, that would be more fun. But we play it on Google Slides because it allows instant editing without anyone having to create an account. So it allows my players to keep their anonymity. But for me, the real thing about world building, it's like you were saying with World Anvil, it's answering the questions, man. I can't write a world. I can't create it. I can't sit down and just put words to paper. I need the challenge of somebody saying to me, well, what if, dwarves weren't short? And I'm like, dwarves aren't short, but okay. Things like that. What if, what about this? What happens when? And those kind of questions, they get me going on a roll. But what I've actually found, and it might be because, I spent 10 years as a teacher, is that I'm not a very good writer, but I'm a great editor. For example, something we may talk about later is the story starter. Luke Gygax gave me a story starter that was like one paragraph long, and I'm like, no, this is not going to work, dude. So I edited it, and we worked together, and we went back and forth. But I was asking him questions, and I'm like, can you use more evocative language? Can you use things that draw a story picture? When you say it's a city, how far is it? Those kind of things. And I find that working with somebody else, bouncing ideas off of somebody, I become much better at it because I can think of the things that's going to happen, and there's no amount of writing or preparation that'll ever get you past the players, because they will just trounce on anything you create by coming up with things you could never have anticipated.
Yeah, no, I absolutely hear you on that on all angles. If anyone's ever caught an actual live stream of Careful Cantrip, there's nothing that goes right. There's nothing I can do to kind of point them in a specific direction. It's pretty much chaos from point A to point B, or C or D or B. But that's interesting to hear. I'm always interested to hear how other DMs kind of struggle with that challenge in terms of, okay, your players really want to go off and do something completely different than what you want them to do, and now all of a sudden you might have to work out something specifically on the fly for that session, which I think is an amazing thing for DMs to challenge themselves with, because the more that you can get away from, and I know this whole series is based on world building, but the further that you can move away from actually building specific elements, like, okay, well, this city's here, or this pantheon is this, and get to that improv section, I think it leads to the credence of what you were saying earlier, Mike, in terms of, it is truly a collaborative storytelling. And if I'm going and building the entire world for them, then how collaborative is the storytelling at that point in time? Shanks, what about you? Do you have a particular method to get started in terms of when you really get into world building? Do you use any tools for that? And kind of what are those things that you utilize?
I guess what I would say is I start with what I call anchor points. I need smaller things that make sense to me that I can build out from. So in building Hestera, the world in which Wizards of Zakaria takes place, I started with one city, capital city of a small nation at the edge of the continent. And why are they there? Why is the academy there? Why are these players going to be interested in what's going on in this city? And then from there, relationships to other nations kind of form in my head, and where these different nations might be situated, and what is the political structure, and what is the general state of affairs for the world at large. And that seems like a lot, but really all I'm doing is deciding on the skeleton, the framework of the world, because the rest of it I want the players to fill in. So I built about half of the world map, and then I started asking the players questions about their characters and where they might come from and what they were doing. So then I built out another portion of the map and added things to the existing parts that they have mentioned. And then from there, we are going to build it out further in game. So I feel like as long as the world makes sense to me, then all of the little details of what's going on around them, we're gonna figure that out as the players explore and ask questions and interact. It's just I feel like I come from like a very middle of the road school of thinking where it's like, you do need a world. Some things need to be concrete, but then the rest of it is fluid. It has to evolve and adapt as the players interact with the world around them. Mm-hmm. As for tools, I basically always start by opening up Google Docs, because it's just, to me, it's the easiest thing to access wherever I am, whenever I am. Like, just, yes. I have an idea when I'm, sitting in traffic, which you shouldn't do, but I quickly pull up my phone and I go like, oh, so this branch exists because of this. And then I just put it aside. I've thought about stepping up to World Anvil, but the problem that at least I saw, now I don't understand it that well because I glanced very briefly at it, but it seems like it wants you to decide on things when you write them. And for me, I'll be like, okay, so this country did that, and then I'll put like 6 or 7 possible reasons that happened. And as we grow within playing the game, I'll decide on which of those things, or maybe something completely new that caused it.
Right. Yeah,
it's more fluid. It doesn't lock me into a decision.
Can I actually, Shanks, you reminded me of something. One of my favorite things to do with world building is there's another Twitch streamer, Alyssa Faden, who draws maps. And I love to jump into her streams and watch her draw the maps, because usually the person she's drawing the maps for, who commissioned them, will be there. And I can be like, okay, so why do you have it this way? And like, I start asking them questions. I'm like, okay, so you have a coliseum near the water. Why is that? Or you have, the city is divided into these different parts, but you have the rich area right up against the poor area. How are the people going to interact with that? Isn't there like a buffer zone? And like, suddenly, every so often, they'll be like, can you just stop? But other times they're like, oh, you're helping me come up with like, like we're developing world building together. And it's in maps, I think, is a huge way to inspire world building, is just looking at the elements and saying, why is it this way? How did it end up there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always, you have to have context behind it, because you can always come up with just some cool stuff on the fly, but and this is going to both Mike and Shank's point, that at some point you have to nail down the context of whatever you're working on at that point in time, whether it's, I have 6 options for this political intrigue storyline, which one am I going to pick from, or alternatively, looking at the actual geography and the demographics of a map or a city or anything along those lines. It all has to make sense within the context of everything along those lines. Jasper, what? How do you really focus? Because I mean, let's say that when you're whenever you're world building, you have to work at it from two brains perspective. You have your writer brain and you have your editor brain. So your writer brain is just constantly going, and whether you're driving down the street causing accidents typing on Google Docs, or whether you're kind of sitting at home and just kind of brainstorming away on pen and paper, you have that writer element where it's always wild, it's always going crazy. But then you have to come to your editor mode and say, okay, I have to make this somewhat canonical. So Jasper, when you're faced with that dilemma of saying, okay, I've got all this cool stuff, how do I actually fit this into my world, or where's the best place to put it? What's your general thought process behind that when you're selecting certain things? Is it based on what it's going to do better for the campaign? Is it just, do you think it would be cooler to be here? Walk us through a little bit on that when you're doing your world building.
Wow, Dave, that's an extensive question. Let me see if I can answer that. Well, I think that when you start building a world, if it's in your head or on paper, it doesn't really matter. At a certain point, you get this feeling about the context that you will be creating for the characters to drop them in, as Shanks also said earlier, and then the shift comes towards where an adventure will start, and for that you have to get a bit specific. You have to think of what kind of characters will play into this adventure that I'm going to run, and from there on you really make the connection between the characters and the universe, so to say, and they have a goal, but the interaction with the characters will make that goal either become hard-boiled or make them fall in love with the characters or something, or they will die within the first 30 seconds of the adventure, and then you have nothing left, or you have a totally different story to tell. Mm-hmm. And I think it happens while you are playing that things start really solidifying. I remember this one scene where I gave Spirit Shaman a feature where he could see souls all around him, and while he was in the city, he looked beneath the city and he saw all these souls that still remained in dead bodies buried in the crypts there, and suddenly they got a great aversion towards the gods because they thought, why are the gods keeping these people alive in these crypts and everything? And then the whole adventure took a whole different route than I had originally planned. They made all the other decisions, because if they had just asked, it was a noble thing that they were still, doesn't matter. And then it took the whole adventure sideways, and then the only thing that remains is what you have thought up before, and that's the bigger context. And then you start improvising because of what you know, what the world is about. So that's what makes it canonical, the interactions that the players have with this big scheme you've put up. And of course there are certain characters who will guide the player somewhat, or will determine players' action in some other way, but it's the micro to the macro, and somewhere in between it happens, the solidification. Hope I'm being
No, I think you made a very, very interesting point that I think that we really haven't touched on too much in terms of our talk today. But I want to turn this over to some of the other panel members in terms of Shanks and Mike. We're always thinking about cool things that we want to do. We're always saying, oh, this would be awesome, and really focusing on that writer brain of us. In terms of taking those ideas and whatnot, is there a process that you go through to say, I want this to happen here, or I need this or I want to put it over in this corner of the map or this part of the campaign? Do you have any methods or words of wisdom for the outgoing DMs that are watching the stream right now in terms of how do you take your crazy ideas and make it into something consistent enough where people can be like, oh, I can kind of visualize that, and we're gonna play with it now.
Well, I actually several things kind of come to mind. First off, I look at campaigns as sort of a gradual release method. In terms of the first session, the DM's driving the train because he has to. You need to get people invested. Like, for example, the first session, I needed a hook that people were going to get involved because their inclination would have been to not make trouble in this academy where the consequences of making trouble are quite severe. So I had one person who antagonized all three of them in a way that they just couldn't possibly resist it. They were just all personally involved and invested immediately. And then, of course, I had somebody there in the person of Fade who was going to taunt them further if they were even seemed like they might not engage with it. But then through each session, you kind of let go a little bit more and a little bit more to say, well, what are you doing? It goes from which of the 2 or 3 things are you going to do to what are you going to do?
Yeah.
With that said, when I have that writer brain going and I'm like, oh, this would be a cool idea, I would love for them to explore that. Yeah, I just put those as sort of, I've come to the mentality of these are the things that can crop up if they're not making enough trouble for themselves already. I found that players often will make trouble for themselves if you just leave them to it. But
True.
but in case they don't, I always have like 6 or 7 possible encounters or possible rivals or, you know, situations that could come up socially that are written in a way that it doesn't have to be that town or it doesn't have to be this forest. They're written in a way that it's like these believably could come up in multiple settings. And if I find that they're really lost for something to do, then guess what? It's time to stir the pot a little bit. Let's have someone show up and depending on where they are and what they're doing at the time, I find something that I think is going to particularly interest them.
Mm-hmm.
I like to add that when it comes to creating things, I'm going to first off say something that's shouldn't be controversial. Is Curse of Strahd is probably one of the best designed campaigns ever throughout all the editions.
Ooh,
because
okay.
what it does is it creates a world that's explorable but not overwhelming. It starts you off in a place where you can handle what's around you immediately, but you also see what you can get to by the things that you can't access. You have a reason to build up. For example, no one's going to drop into Barovia and immediately run to the castle. You know, that's a meat grinder. That's not going to happen. But what you do is you give the players room to grow. You give them guidance. You give them something to chase after, and they may not chase it. I'm telling you right now that in every world I've run, I'm like, here's a really cool thing that if you get it, it'll make you powerful. And they're like, yeah, but what if we hang out with this goblin? And I'm like, I don't know. Let's find out. And, you know,
it's always a goblin.
It's always, or a kobold. But yeah, it usually ends up being a goblin. And the thing is that sometimes you can play with that for a little while, but sometimes once you've done that, you can't just do that for the rest of the sessions. You need to say, hey, here's an inciting incident. Here's some pressure from the world that you need to get back on track. And a lot of people resist railroading. But I also have seen many games where I just sit down with the players and I'm like, okay, where do you want to go? And they're like, where can we go? I'm like, anywhere. And they're like, yeah, but where? And like, you have to gauge what you're doing to the players. And when you're creating a world, there needs to be a reason to go forward. Otherwise they just get comfortable.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there. And you bring up a very interesting point in terms of the Curse of Strahd stuff, because I've never really thought about it like this before. And I get what you're saying in terms of maybe it's controversial or not, mostly because I think Curse of Strahd is one of the best campaign or adventure settings I've ever seen, because it's the closest thing I've ever seen from Wizards of the Coast officially that is a true potential sandbox game. It is not railroaded in any way, shape, or form, something like the Storm King's Thunder or anything along those lines. You know, it's not a linear progression. And there are a few other modules out there that definitely give credence to a little bit more of a sandbox, but Barovia itself, if you've actually read through it or run it before, it's like, go wherever you want to go. Here's the map. Where do you want to go? What do you want to do? And if that means, hey, I want to go to the castle right away, you can do that, no problem. I mean, Mike's absolutely right. They're all going to die within 10 seconds. But, you know, if that's the choices that they make, then that's the choices that they make. And I think that in terms of taking your cool ideas and putting context around it, we all kind of touched on a little bit, but really what it boils down to is player agency. And, you know, my own personal method, and I'll just kind of put my 2 cents in there, is the fact that how I determine what goes in and what stays out in terms of my crazy ideas is typically based around session 0. When I sit down with my players, the very first thing I do is, okay, guys, what type of campaign do you want to play this time? You know, the one that we're playing with today, it's very Indiana Jones-esque. There's MacGuffins, there's discoveries, there's mysteries, there's intrigue, because that's what my players asked for. You know, I sat down with them and said, okay, here's 4 potential places in my world that you can go, and here's the type of adventures that you could find there. So really, it's that to me, and it's you know, it gives me an anchor that I can always go back to after session 0 to say, is this something that my players will enjoy if I give them a hook for it? And, you know, it gives me a little bit more of a compass so that I can do exactly what Shanks was saying in terms of, you know, okay, what things have I created that I can put into that specific encounter or player hook or whatever the case is, and then and I know that the players are going to catch on to it just because that's what they said they wanted to do from the first place. Which brings up a good segue into another little piece of DMing, and we're kind of moving a little bit outside of world building right now, but tips and tricks from our wonderful DMs on player agency. How do you keep your players engaged? And we'll turn it over to Mike to start off with.
Easy. I threaten to make them DM if they don't play.
Threatening with the worst possible fate, right?
No, kind of actually a little bit off of what you said earlier. Player agency, yes, is important, but also taking the temperature as you play. Because I had a game that I was running it in an Eberron world, and it was this high political intrigue game, and at first the players were like, oh, this is neat, and then we're like 6 sessions in, they're like, we hate this. And like they didn't say it, but I got it from the way they were playing. They're like, oh, we're doing this again, all right. Yeah. And you gotta read the room with them, but also you got to see, like, I talk to my players in between sessions and I run little bits for them, because like for every so often one player's like, I'm not feeling this, and I try to engage with their character, and not necessarily a backstory. I'm not a big backstory person. I love the people who can make that 100-page backstory and they want to see every instance of it. But for me, it's all about moving the story forward individually and building more with the players. And that agency comes in. I'm like, what would make your character exciting, or how would you like to do this? Like, for example, when I run games, you don't multi-class unless you've got a story reason for it. So cool. You might actually need to seek out the story reason for how you went from being a rogue to also a cleric. Like, did you find God after picking pockets? You know, what happened? So it allows me to have the players invest in their characters. And I think that getting them to invest in what their character is doing actually creates the player agency a lot more.
Yeah, no, I just had this great visual of what you just said in terms of a rogue pickpocketing someone and pulling out one of those little pamphlets of, have you met our Lord and Savior kind of thing, and just being like, well, this
Divine
is worth
burglar.
more than gold to me.
Yeah.
It's a fake 20 with a message on it. Yeah.
I love it.
Here we go.
Yeah, really. I'm scribbling notes down as we go, kind of thing. Jasper, what about you? How do you try and focus on the player agency so that you keep the players engaged, they're not bored, and they want to continue the story? Because I think that's the biggest problem is when campaigns die out. It's mostly because either the DM has lost interest in the world and the story, or most likely the players have lost it to a certain point, and you're looking at around the table. Some people are now on their phones and not paying attention to anything. So how do you keep that hook going for a long-term campaign? And I ask you, Jasper, because I know you've run one of your last campaigns ran for 11 years or something like that.
I'm still doing 2 now that both have run about 9 years so far, and they are level 13.
That's amazing.
So still well to go. Yeah, and well, it's interesting. I sometimes feel that I'm making mistakes, so to say, and really dragging them across a field that I don't want to be dragged over. I had this. Okay, so when they were about level 8, my party, 2 of them died. And then I said, do you want to take the red pill or the blue pill? And they took the red pill, and they made a deep dive into an alternative thing that basically became a 2.5-year resurrection of the 2 characters that died. And while they were in that intermezzo, they were experiencing this decaying world where everything they did and touched really shattered and became broken, and they were kind of the agencies of this chaos that brought this world down. And at a certain point, they became kind of bleak, demotivated, because everything they did worked in their didn't come into a positive fruition. And I had a really, really difficult time determining, is this me? Are they role-playing this? Or what's happening? What's even happening? And then when they finished that arc and they went back into their original characters, and 2 of them got resurrected because of shenanigans, I had a similar episode when I said, do you want to go 13,000 years into the future or not? And I had expected them to not do that, but they went anyway, and they got into this new world, and they had to learn it all over again, and that was a bit of a harsh moment as well. And the thing is, because my group really wants to know what is at the end of the tunnel, they worked through it pretty hard, and I tried to keep it as lively as possible, but there were points where it became how do you say, well, shaking grounds or something. Here's where my English lags a bit, but I think it's in the end, it's the trust that you are working to something that will bring all these things towards a bigger goal that makes campaigns last for so long, and that's the trust from the players in the Dungeon Master, and the Dungeon Master in his players, and being able to talk about it. How are you experiencing it? Why didn't you like this? We recently had a very, very harsh arc where we were dealing with the backlash of one player dropping out, and his character had become evil in the campaign, and it was really hard to do because this player wasn't at the table anymore, and didn't go over that smoothly either, and they still had to react to his character, and that was another harsh part. But then at the end, they all said this was harsh. We didn't say it while we were playing it, but we felt really like there was a big pressure on the situation, and now that's gone, it's a relief for us that this arc has finished, and we can go on with kind of clear conscience again. So it's a kind of real life matters versus in-game matters versus the trust in that the story is going somewhere that's exciting, that keeps us going for such long campaigns and really bullying through the harsh stuff. There can be harsh stuff in your campaign in that regard. I don't know if I've answered your question with this, but those were the kind of things that went through my head as you asked the question.
Well, I think
sometimes it's hard work, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, no, I mean any DM that runs their own homebrew stuff, whether it be adventures or worlds or whatever the case is, you know, I have the utmost respect for those individuals, because not only are you working through the complexities of the overall, you know, skeletal frame of the world, but you're working through the social political elements that just naturally be at the that come up at the table. I mean, when people, you know, move away or leave the table, how do you address that, and how do you know, do their characters just disappear off into the night, or do you create an NPC, and then how do you continue to keep that going at any given time? So I think that it definitely, it's a difficult job, but you know, if you're willing to take that on, that's something that you know, you should be respected for in any way, shape, or form. But I think what you touched on an interesting point in terms of pacing. I mean, that's amazing to have a 9-year campaign and still have individuals that are dedicated enough to it. So it really lends the credence to you know, not only your storytelling ability, but what your pacing is like in terms of when you're running the actual adventures. And we'll talk a little bit more about pacing in a little while. But I just want to give Shanks the opportunity to kind of address, you know, the question at hand in terms of, Shanks, what do you do as a DM that really helps towards, you know, player agency and player engagement and everything along those lines?
A few things come to mind. First of all, when we're doing the whole create your character, you know, develop the background and everything, to me, like, I don't, like Mike touched on, I don't need 100 pages of backstory. If you want to do it, great. That's, you know, I probably won't read it all. But what I want to know more than anything is what drives them. Why are they doing this thing? I never tell them, like, create your character and then I'll tell you what, like, the initial plot hook is. It's always, this is what's going to happen. Create a character that is driven to be a part of this initial inciting incident. And that way we understand each other in terms of the campaign and the character are cohesive and there's something that's driving them forward. And as long as I know what that is, I have a way to continue to make the character invested in the things that are happening around them. Secondly, I like to give each player focus from time to time. This third session we just did was largely focused on Akalia. And, you know, you might think, well, I don't want to, you know, what's the word? Like isolate the other players or anything. But by creating a little bit of a focus on one player for a session, you're not leaving anybody out. You're giving someone a chance to shine. And they love those moments. I love those moments personally. And, you know, it doubles down on the investment that they as a player have and that their character in game has. And then, you know, next week, it's possible that we'll go back to, you know, kind of dividing it evenly. And then the week after that, somebody else will have a stronger focus. And by doing that, I think that players really get invested in the story going forward. It reignites the passion that they have, even if you've been playing for years and years. It's a reason for them to go, oh yeah, I'm important in this. Yeah. This matters. Yeah. What I do influences the world. And I of course, I'm blessed with amazing players. So I don't really have much trouble, to be honest. But those are the things that I try to be intentional about.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Sorry, go ahead, Jasper.
It's interesting what you're saying about these. Sorry if I'm taking over, Dave, but I got triggered by the thing that you, what you're saying, that you take the time to really put one character in the spotlight. And I think that's great, and I think that even when your campaign is lasting longer and longer, the moment that they can stay in the spotlight might be for several sessions, because then the other players are really invested in what's happening for those players as well, and write their script, so to say, around that person's story arc. And I think that the longer you go, the longer these escapades can last.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think that for me, and I agree wholeheartedly with what everybody's saying so far. You know, it's and in terms of the whole concept of the backstories and everything along those lines, yeah, I love it when I see players that are invested enough where they're like, I love my character, I fleshed out this backstory. By the way, it's just a little bit longer than all 3 Lord of the Rings books, but you know, take your time, because you know, you'll get through it eventually and understand what my character's all about. So you know, and knowing me, I love my templates. You know, I can't reiterate that enough. So what I generally do is I do have a template that I send out to each one of my players at the starting to say, okay, here's the campaign setting. Here's, you know, roughly a page or a couple paragraphs of what you can expect on this continent, you know, what you can expect from this story and everything along those lines. And that's generally done, you know, in between session 0 and session 1. But I do give them kind of 4 or 5 questions where it's the, you know, what are the important aspects of your character that I need to know for the overall campaign? So like a good example would be, you know, what motivates your characters and their decisions? And then I'll give them a couple examples like helping people, serving a cause and a faith, money, power, knowledge, anything along those lines. And that kind of progresses from there in terms of, you know, does your player have any secrets? What are they doing out there? And, you know, it's interesting because particularly for my Careful Cantrip campaign that we're playing right now, without me coercing it in any way, shape, or form, my players have naturally tied themselves together in their backstories. It's very loose, but at this point it's interesting because one arc will now automatically start giving credence to another person's arc, and it'll just kind of build from there, which I'm very interested in terms of seeing how all of that plays out in the long run. But you know, I do love the story arc. I think there's, you know, we're all, you know, as close to boomers as we're going to get in terms of, you know, internet aging, if you will. And I think that a huge inspiration for me when I'm trying to work out my campaigns and storylines and everything along those lines, I love 80s cartoons. Or early 90s cartoons. You know, G.I. Joe is one that pops into my head immediately because you had this show about a group of people that each episode had a little bit of credence towards one person in particular, but it involved the entire group somehow. And, you know, there's lots of them out there. You know, Conan the Adventurer was another perfect example. Yeah, it was always based around Conan, but maybe it's about his phoenix this time, or maybe it's about the acrobatics individual. So I think that lends to the whole concept of what you guys are saying in terms of how to build that arc and keep your players engaged. I think at this point we're kind of coming up to the 1 hour mark. I think we're gonna just do a quick break for a minute so we can do a quick bio break, maybe get refreshments or anything along those lines. Just want to quickly give a couple shout outs to those who have done all the follows and the subscriptions and whatnot. Thank you so much. Retro Waver, Mquake, and some of my players, Eli's, as well as Vic Straws. And Voidcast for the host, thank you so much for that as well. You know, we can't do this without you guys and wouldn't want to do it without you guys. So your follows, your subs, even, you know, we love the Prime stuff. So if you have one and you're enjoying our face, you know, feel free to drop it down. We would very much appreciate that. But we're going to take a quick break, go get some refreshments on our coffees. We suggest you do the same out there. And we will be back in about 3 minutes. So stay tuned, everyone. And we're back. Thank you to all of the lovely chat members that have stuck around so far. I think that we're having a wonderful time and a wonderful discussion so far. Hopefully you guys are learning a whole bunch about some ways to think about things when you're planning out your campaign. There's a lot of things when you're doing your world building that you really want to think about up front, and they're very theoretical ideas behind that, and it's more so for the fact that it gives you that anchor. And I think all of the DMs on screen right now have that same kind of thought process of you can build anything you want, you can make any creative things that you want, as long as you have that anchor to tie it back to. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to answer a few questions that have come in from chat. But first and foremost, I just want to say a quick thank you for Ashley Gibbons for that sub gift or the sub prime. We very much appreciate your face and everything that you bring to the table for us, Ashley. So appreciate the continued support. Anyway, first question is from RKJ Gaming Girl. How do you deal with burnout or writer's block?
Well, I'm going to state shortly what I said earlier, that the best way to get past writer's block is to get questions about it. Get somebody else to ask you questions about what you're working on or things like that, and you'd be surprised how quickly writer's block goes away.
Yep. Yeah,
and the other thing is, if you have a writer's block, it sometimes can occur when you're doing too many things at the same time. And sometimes you just have to not take a break, but most of my ideas come up when my mind is wandering. And if your mind can't wander, then you're too busy. So please let your mind wander at certain points and just catch up with what you're trying to tell.
Yeah, what I do is if I'm really stuck and having a hard time getting into the right headspace, is I'll just start absorbing other similar content. So I'll listen to very fantasy-esque music, I'll play video games, I'll go back to some of the things that really inspired me as a kid, like the old Final Fantasy games, things like that. And as long as I don't worry about it, like, sooner or later something sparks that inspiration again.
Yeah.
And suddenly I have a passion to really drive the story forward again.
Oh, I just remembered one other thing is also it's okay to actually use tropes. There's a great website that just pretty much outlines what every trope is. Pick one at random and see if you can find a way to make it work in your game.
tvtropes.com has been a bookmark of mine forever, and I'm a firm believer of that as well. I think that tropes are important within your game, and they're not played out. So for any DMs or writers out there that say, I don't want to use this because it's a trope. Tropes are a trope for a reason. They work and they're proven and everything along those lines. A perfect example, I was going back and watching some of our earlier episodes just to make sure that I was consistent with our lore. And there was one in particular where my players met a troll under a bridge. And he was the bridge troll. I mean, you can't get more tropey than that. And why it works and why it's such a great thing to introduce into your games is because people haven't lived that exact moment. They've seen it a million times, or they've read it in books, or whatever the case is. So now giving the players the opportunity to interact with that exact circumstance, it's going to give them immediate player agency, because they're gonna be like, oh, I've seen this before, and I know how this is supposed to work out. I'm gonna take a shot at it and put my spin on it, kind of thing. So I think absolutely agree with you there, Mike, in terms of tropes. And if you haven't already, go to tvtropes.com. You can literally have everything you want. You could base entire adventures just going through that systematic list one by one.
Absolutely. Sorry, go ahead, Jasper.
Okay. So I have two little things to say about that, because now we have a blonde Dave troll, right? For those careful Cantrips fan, they should know what I'm referring to. The other thing is that what Shanks was saying earlier, at the start, when you're designing your own campaign and you want to make it unique, you really don't have to. And the funny thing is that when I read through the history that's described in the Tal'Darai book from Matthew Mercer, which was his own release and not in the wizard setting, and I had this discussion about how the world was created and what the gods did at the start, and I really thought that was great. And someone else said, yeah, I've read that 100 times before. And both are true, because sometimes you just iterate on the same thing and it becomes unique because of the experiences of the players, not because it's a unique story. So just wanted to put my 2 cents in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The curse of trying to be unique needs to be discarded. Nothing's original, like plain and simple. You know, Tolkien is probably the most original fantasy writer that we've ever had, and yet he copied so many things from Nordic mythology. I mean, before that, his big contribution to the literary world was a translation of Beowulf. Go read Beowulf, then read Lord of the Rings again, and tell me how original he was. He was, absolutely. He was creative and genius. But my point is, even his work is, you know, derived out of other things, and that's okay. You know, and one other point to the writer's block thing is, if you really can't, like, you have 2 weeks to come up with something new for your players to do, or some new story arc, or some great hook to make everyone, if you really can't do it in the time, throw a trope out like a, you know, mysterious stranger in the tavern, and I guarantee you they will create a story for you. Your players will they will start throwing out so many theories that all you have to do is pick one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing I love, tropes don't get the credit that they deserve, because yeah, you're lending to a concept that's already been done, but what's important is that you make it your and your players' piece. You know, find a way to make that trope so much more memorable, you know. And I'll go back to the example of the bridge under the troll, or the bridge under the troll under the bridge. You know, you got to watch out for. There's the new trope for you guys. There's the new trope. You want to switch up your trope? Put a troll or a bridge under a troll. How about that next time? But yeah. I mean, that's...
And he's basically standing on the bridge, right? So.
Well, exactly. Or the bridge is standing on the troll. Who knows, right? But I think it's it not only allows you to lend to what people already know and have established in their own mind. Those tropes are what are going to potentially make amazingly memorable moments for both you and your players. And when it comes down to it, I mean, you are collaborative storytelling. So, you know, adding a trope that everybody understands and has been to at one point in time, and then making it their own, means a lot to both the DM and the player at any given time. So I definitely have to agree with what everybody was said. Does anybody have any more to add to that before we move on to our next question?
Yeah, one little thing, and I think I've said this on Talking Void before, but that's why I watch like all the DC series, because I think I've watched like 25 seasons of that. 25 times 24 episodes is a lot of episodes. Mm-hmm. And I really liked only the I think it was the 5th season of Arrow, because I thought that was well told pretty well, and all the rest was kind of training myself to get the gist of what they were doing, and getting just these small hints about what I could do better in my own storytelling. And so sometimes just watch stuff, and don't watch it because you think it's a unique thing to that you're watching, but because you start analyzing how the story is being told. That really helps in your dungeon mastering. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to that a little bit, and it's you reminded me because it's spurred when you mentioned Arrow, is DMs out there, if you're looking for, you know, things to say or how NPCs would say something or monologue or give a little bit, read comic books. Comic books are the most valuable resource I've ever used when it comes to the actual dialogue that's being used. They have long things that they're not too long. You're not going to be going and rambling on or anything along those lines, but focus on the language that they use, because, you know, these are guys or girls who have been writing for years and years and years, and they have to focus on dialogue as opposed to, you know, the fantasy books that are out there. So Just a little piece of advice: if you're looking for dialogue or how to say something or do anything along those lines, pick up a couple graphic novels, and it'll spur your creative juices flowing in a heartbeat. I can promise you that. Okay, moving on to our next question. Hairsteffs asks, do you guys use bits of pre-made D&D / third-party content within your worlds?
As the one who probably does the most, yes, I do, but I'm also an incredibly lazy DM. I like to just read something or use my knowledge of it. And I'd like to add that there's a pitfall. Being highly knowledgeable about a topic is really good for helping you build stuff. However, you need to remember that, and I had a DM when I was young that did this, your goal isn't to prove how smart you are to other people. So you need to make sure that when you're bringing your knowledge in, you're bringing it in a way that other people can discover it, and they can engage in that knowledge and learn it for themselves rather than you just lecturing them. But I use a lot of the pre-made stuff, and then I'll add my own twist for fun, because for me it's easier just to tell the story in a world that people understand. And I feel that a lot of like the Forgotten Realms and the places that people have seen for years, they're comfortable enough that the players will know, I want to go here, I want to go there, or whatever, because it's a familiar setting. It's like if you drop me off, you know, I've been to New York City a few times, but you drop me off there, I'm like, I know where I'd like to go here. You know, it's stuff like that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. I mean, there's so many good things that you can find out there in terms of resources, whether it's official stuff or whether it's things on the DM Guild. You know, I've done that many times in the past, where I'll just go through and I'll say, okay, I'm looking for an adventure that kind of feels like this. I'll look at what's out there and kind of helps me kind of structure the adventure as well, in terms of determining, okay, you know, if I want to do a heist, the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go read a bunch of heist adventures to see, okay, what works for me, what doesn't along those lines. And if there's elements of that overall adventure that I agree with, hell yeah, I'm going to bring that into my game, because that's cool, and I think my players are going to think it's cool. So yeah, I absolutely, D&D, especially any kind of World of the Coast stuff or third-party stuff, is there, and it's meant to be tweaked. It's meant to be made into your own game. And Gary Gygax made it that way. If you, again, looking back to the little brown booklets in the red box, he wanted to give you a system that you could utilize to create your own worlds, to create your own game. So, if the whole game was built off of that, it's a disservice to yourself as a DM not to try and take things that work and massage it a little bit, right?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I would say that I don't really utilize much of it anymore in terms of actual content, but I do sort of use the concept, the types of interactions that modules represent. It's like, okay, so you arrive in this town now, and a module will give you like 3 or 4 options of things that the players can do, kind of thing. Like there's this shop, there's this guy on the street, and in that sense, I carry on that type of interaction in that I throw these plot hooks out. Here are some things that stand out to you. What do you do? And that way they've got those ready-made options available to them, but they've also got literally anything else they can think of.
Right. Absolutely. And again, whether you're taking the actual material and massaging it a little bit, or whether you're taking the framework, that stuff is there for you to utilize in any way, shape, or form you can. Don't feel limited to say, well, if I use third-party or official content, that I have to use it the way that it is. That's not the point of D&D. It's a collaborative storytelling, and that's going to mean things change along those lines. But Jasper, I think you were going to say something, and I kind of jumped in there. So go ahead. What are your thoughts on official content and third-party content?
Well, I said yep, but I started my biggest campaign with doing the Night Below, and I built off that to build my own campaign, and it was a great resource because it learned me how to pace stuff, and so I recommend using modules anytime. The other part is though that in the 5th edition modules I have don't know how to put it, but I've got 2 adventures, the Horde of the Dragon Queen, and I recently bought Rise of the Frost Maiden, and they are beautiful, and you can certainly learn from these books, especially the Frost Maiden one. It's done so very well, but I can never get past the first 10 pages of such a book. The only thing I can do is look at monster entries, picking some maps out of them, getting the gist of the story because of the first few things that have been written in there, and then I'm going to do my own thing. And I think that's okay for dungeon masters who have a lot of experience, but if you get there, then that's great. But well, that's how I work. So yeah, use them because they will help you, but at a certain point, just really take the parts that you want to introduce to your own world, and you don't have to read the whole thing for that. And the other thing is that some DMs confuse the adventures that they started to write themselves with these kinds of products, and I did this on my Jasper's Laboratory show. I showed them the first page of the book where it was listed how many people worked on that single adventure. You're but a single dungeon master, so don't compare yourself to these products. Just learn from them and do your own stuff, and scribble something on paper and scribble something in a document, and then that's your adventure. You really don't need more than that. So don't get confused in this world of modules, but learn from them wherever you can. That's what I'm trying to say, and learn.
Yeah, I think that I'm probably the same way in terms of, I've gone out, I've purchased a ton of the source material. I start to read through something and I'm like, I'll put it down and I won't pick it back up from that perspective. But what I do a lot from time to time is I'll just open up a random page when I do have that kind of writer's block or anything along those lines, and I'll read 2 or 3 pages just to see what spurs in terms of, getting the creative juices flowing in terms of all that. And I always find that when I look at those kind of materials, that's going to give me my own ideas because I can see kind of what other people are doing along those lines. And I have to 100% agree with you, Jasper, in terms of you could never by yourself properly create a Wizards of the Coast style campaign setting. You need a team around you, you need the experience behind you, but that should never stop you from really diving in, even if it's just a little bit to start off with, just to jot some points down, and then go from there, kind of thing.
Yeah, indeed. That's how you should use these books for Dungeon Master inspiration, I think. Yeah, or just run the module, of course. That's okay, and then. Oh, yeah. But never compare yourself. That's what I think I'm trying to say the most in this case. Yeah,
the best way I found to read the modules is I'll put them on my tablet, and then I'll have the screen reader read them. And it turned out I discovered that my daughter loves falling asleep to that. So my youngest has been listening to D&D modules as she falls asleep for the last year and a half. So I've gone through quite a lot of them.
That's nice. Absolutely adorable. That's adorable. I can just see it now. D&D ASMR. Let's do it, guys. I think we have an entire new product that we can put out on the market. And the dragon slits the throat of the poor bandit down. It would be great. It would be great. Just doing the little here and there. It's great.
AC 12. HP 13.
Oh yeah. Tables are the best. She loves tables.
The dragon's breath cascading up your body and melting your flesh.
Recharge 5 and 6.
Yeah. Legendary action is recharge of 3 per day. Yeah, no, it's
took a weird turn.
Yeah, really. Well, I mean, it wouldn't be Careful Cantrip without that, right? We have an actual question dedicated to our friend Mike. I teach high school, and I hear DM Dave use teacherisms all the time while we play. Do you find there's an overlap in a lot of the skills? I find it helps me appreciate all of the planning he does for us. And that's an interesting question. I like to talk about that from time to time. Is as a DM, what skills do you think that it lends to your IRL lifestyles?
Well, I mean, having been a teacher, you're dealing with 30 goblins running around your room on a daily basis trying to destroy everything they touch, and you got to keep them focused. And it was middle school, so I mean, I'm not far off. But a big part of it is it's the ability to read the room of what's happening, because you're going to have 20% that are super engaged, 20% that are not at all engaged. But that middle group is the easiest to screw up on. And with your players, every party has that. There's the one person who wants to be the leader. There's the one person who's just there to like roll dice and hang out with everybody. But you kind of got to focus on each one. And I'm gonna say something I put in the chat earlier, which is we're talking about player focus. Is I have post-it notes with players and NPCs, and I'll have the names written on them so that I can spotlight that person when it comes up. And it's the same thing as drawing sticks from a cup when I'm calling on kids. And so as soon as I spotlight that person with an event or an activity or something that speaks to their skills, I move it to the bottom of the post-it note stack, and then I'll shuffle them later after I get through the whole stack. This way I make sure that each person gets attention, but also gets a chance to shine. Because there may be a quiet person who doesn't want to bring it all out all the time. But it's just like with students. If a person's quiet, there may be a reason they're quiet, whether they're uncomfortable or they're embarrassed or something like that, and they don't want the spotlight for some reason. So it really comes down to a teacher skill of just reading each individual and seeing what they need from you, and then trying to provide it to them, while also keeping an eye on all the other people. And DMing is actually easier because it's only like 5 or 6 players instead of 30 kids. So it makes the whole process, I'm prepared for it. Let's say that.
Yeah.
Jasper, what do you think? What do you think is the some of the main skills that D&D have taught you that have translated to the real world for you?
It's a back and forth, I think. I'm a philosopher. I studied philosophy, and I studied a bit of art, and I'm working at a library. So I take a lot of knowledge and meta knowledge into my games as a dungeon master. And I think that when I was a teenager, I already had this meta mindset in a way, and I think that it quite humbled me, the experience of playing Dungeons and Dragons, because in the end it's about having friends around your table and leveling with them and doing an adventure with them that speaks to them all. So I think I developed a lot of social skills through playing Dungeons and Dragons and keeping a level ahead during my formative years, and that has really learned me how to cope with situations at work as well, from that kind of perspective. I'm a manager, so I'm a library manager. I have a lot of people working for me, and listening to them, to their stories, and understanding what they want to achieve, and that they are not all the same, have their own expertise, is something that I think I picked up early at the table. So that's what I wanted to add to that. Yeah.
Shanks, what about you? What do you think has really heightened your life, if you will, thanks to D&D?
Active editing. I used to be very much a one and done kind of guy. If I write something, I write it once, and that's what it is. Whether it's good or bad, it's done. Leave me alone now. But D&D has completely changed my philosophy on this. So I used to mock like the things I learned in school in terms of writing, like, oh, you have to start with an outline, then you have to do a rough draft, then you have to do a full draft, then you have to edit it. And now I do like 6 additional stages of that. And even once it's done, I kind of go back and review, and I go, okay, what parts are still movable and should they be moved? So I guess I stopped being as lazy a writer for one, and learned to let go of the ego that I had in terms of writing, in that, like, I'm not going to make something perfect the first time, and even if I did, it's not going to work out. So I'm just much more free in terms of how I let something evolve now.
I try to tell people that all the time, is that you can't polish a turd to a diamond, no matter how hard you try. Sometimes you just have to let an idea go because it wasn't a good idea. You had an idea, you wrote it down, you tried to work on it, that's great, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't let it go or change it or replace it or something. And that's something that people need to get better at, is understanding that not everything is great, not everything is gold.
So if you put a lot of pressure on turd, in the end, it might become a diamond, right?
I mean, scientifically speaking, yes, there's carbon there. We could probably make it work, but
I don't think there's enough carbon.
Very small.
Yeah, really small diamond. Yeah.
You're both so correct in what you were saying, but I had to take that point. Made fun of it.
Yeah, I think that one of the major things that DMing has taught me, and I joke around with it with my players and in our Discord chat of being the humble universe that resides over all, and one would look at that and be like, that guy's a narcissistic prick. And to a certain extent, I would say, I promise that's not who I am in any way, shape, or form. Really, what it boils down to for me is that becoming a DM, it's made me realize a few things that I really never thought of before. One is giving me an entire new sense of empathy towards players and towards people in general. That would be, thinking about the players and their characters within the game and how it kind of works with the world, and you really have to dive into those elements if you want to really involve your players overall. And it's kind of, well, we're going to get into a question in a second that came up in chat that I think deserves a bit of a highlight on its own in terms of players' involvement when it comes to role playing and everything along those lines. But you have to know your players. You have to have a pretty good understanding of the type of things that they're comfortable with and what they're not comfortable with, because the minute that you do something that they're uncomfortable with, that's going to put them off of the game, and that's the last thing that you want to do in general. But I think as an overall, in terms of the qualities that D&D has lent to me and my players and to many of the people who respect this hobby, is that whatever you're doing within the game is actually lending itself towards your life overall. As much as you're playing a role in that character, it's your mind who's processing those things. So in terms of your ability to improvise, in terms of your ability to do critical thinking on a very quick, in a very quick moment kind of thing, as much as you're doing that within a fantasy setting, your brain is exercising all of those components. So it's going to naturally translate to the outside world where, I don't know about you guys, but I find myself thinking much quicker now that I'm a DM versus beforehand. Because you have to be able to think on the fly. And it's a great place to learn those skills because you can screw up completely at the table. But again, once you start flexing those muscles, then it becomes inherently adapted into your real world life.
I agree with the thinker quicking. But I've actually found that being a DM and playing D&D in my real life also has allowed me to rely on other people when it comes to solving a problem, because I can't do everything by myself, and as a party you can't do everything by yourself. So I look more to my team around me, and it's made me a better team player at work and in real life.
Absolutely. And team is the name of the game in terms of D&D. So let's hop into the question that was just brought out, but in terms of how do you deal with the players that might be a little shy with role playing, or the opposite, players who are too dominant. So let's start off with the shy people first, and then we'll kind of transition over to the dominant.
Just kick them. Kick them from your table. They're worthless.
Jesus. Hey, you guys have a very different perspective.
You held
in
that
terms
straight
of,
face so long. I was just about to say, okay, I gotta say something now.
Yeah, European D&D is mean. God.
No, of course not.
Well, Jasper, how about we let you expand or kind of resolve on that point? How would you deal with a shy player, Jasper, at your table?
Well, I have a very shy player at my table, and I just love him because he is the one who takes it all in, and after the session is over, texts me about what he thought about the session and goes deeper into the lore and combines it all. You have to really respect the shy player at your table. And, I know that there was a time that I thought, why isn't this person interacting that much and everything? But he was just taking it in and having another way, experiencing the game in quite another way, but taking just as much away from the table as the other ones. And for the dominant ones, well, I'm a dominant player myself, and I know this of myself, and so I try to rein it in a lot. But you see it. I think that on our own show, on the Precipice of Dreams, I'm a dominant player, and Michel is a dominant player. Sorry to say so, Michel. He's in chat as well, and I think that Herr Stefas and Solwing are very much less dominant, and we really have to respect each other when it comes to that. And when you get told, hey, please rein it in, you have to rein it in, because and you can be quite upfront about it, or you can put it into or guide it that way as a dungeon master. But I think that it's great that if each player also knows what kind of player he is, because that really helps. And I think that in a setting where you're all friends, you should discuss this with each other at regular intervals.
Yeah,
that's my 2 cents.
I agree with you completely. I actually want to start by saying I don't think there's inherently anything wrong with either a dominant player or a shy player. No. They both have their place at the table. What could become an issue is if the dominant player is stepping on toes and talking over others, and literally hijacking the table. And at that point, you have to have a conversation. I mean, at the end of the day, you have to be friends with your players. I mean, even if you're not friends, like they may not be, in your wedding party, but you're playing a game together. You're gonna have to communicate. You're gonna have to get along. So, and the same with a shy player. If they're enjoying themselves and they just don't want to speak up all the time, that's okay. As long as they're enjoying it and they're part of the team and they contribute when they feel it's necessary, that's all right. But if you feel like they are being left out, or they might not, they feel like maybe they don't have the right to speak up in situations, sometimes this happens with newer players too, where they're just like, well, they all know more than me, so I'll just wait until someone directly asks me a question. And that's why it's important, if you have a shy player, to talk to them about it. Are you enjoying yourself? Do you feel like you've had enough opportunity to engage? Is there anything I can do to help you? Do you want me to prompt you? No. In my games, we have some dominant. I'm a dominant player myself. I sort of tend towards leadership roles, and so when we've got a problem to solve or a battle to fight, I'm always kind of the first one to be like, well, here's what I want to do. But we've got other dominant players. We've had players who were more reluctant to speak up, and we've talked it out and come up with ways that we can cohesively play this game in a way that doesn't leave anybody out. And my players are all receptive to that sort of thing. Of course, again, I have amazing players, so I'm kind of blessed in that sense. But I feel like most people who come to the table, if you really just talk to them about expectations and the reason why you need them to either rein it in or just give you some sort of physical cues or that sort of thing, if they feel like they might have something to say, they're going to be receptive to it.
Yeah, I'm in a weird category. I have a tendency to gather people up on the internet, and like I'll put a call out on a forum and be like, "Hey, I want to start a game. Who wants to play?" And then I'll screen people beforehand to make sure that I don't have anyone that's just a weirdo, that they're going to fit each other's play style and expectations and preferences. But I mean, I've been running for years games where I bring together people on the internet and we play, even before the pandemic. And I get a dominant player, or I'll get a quiet player, and I also play a lot at cons where it's like single serving friends, and you don't necessarily know what people are going to be until they sit down. And I found that one of the best things to address a dominant player is they may not know they're doing it, and to be confrontational about it. There's a phrase that completely escapes my mind right now, but it's putting I statements on something. When I talk to them, I'm like, "Hey, I see that you're a great leader. I think that you would be better able to express that by helping the other players, or by giving them a way, by supporting them as a leader." And then the person's like, "Oh," because what ends up happening a lot of times I've seen with dominant players is they just treat other people as if they're characters that they get to move around on the board, and they forget that there's a person attached to that character sheet that doesn't necessarily appreciate that. And as far as with Shire players, I let them be, and I let them find their footing, I let them find their place, but I check in with them. And being mostly online, I have I'll DM them, or I'll send them I actually create a separate channel for each one of my players in our Discord server, so that they can send me messages during the game without having to worry about putting it in the main chat and things like that, so that I can check on them, they can check on me, and it just allows them to be. But I was a shy kid growing up, and then for some reason I turned into a mouthy kid, so I know that I have both sides of that.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I don't think there's anything I could possibly add more to than what's been said. So I'll make it quick and short in terms of how. Oh, sorry, Jasper, go ahead, my friend.
One thing I wanted to address: there's shy players, there are bold players, and there are just players as well. Because now here Stefas is saying in chat, "Am I the shy player?" No, you're not the shy player, but we've got two mouthy players on the table, and I'm one of them. And that always goes over other stuff. I have to be really conscious about that thing. Let's not forget the moderate players.
Yeah. I think that regardless of the type of player that you are, I don't want to downplay any kind of dominant player, because dominant players are invested. I'm not going to say they're dominant. I'm going to say that they're invested players, and you want your players to invest as much as possible while still being able to balance it out with everybody else at the table. So in terms of the dominant players, absolutely check in from time to time, and make sure that they know that if there's other players at the table, but do it outside of the context of the table. You don't want to shame them for their investment into the game and their dedication to the game, because it's something that you want to be able to inspire in other people. A quick tactical thing I do exactly at the table when I'm doing or playing with a more dominant or invested character. If I feel like they're kind of taking the spotlight for a little too long, I'll just do a scene cut. And immediately I'm now focused on another player that, isn't necessarily too shy, or what are they working on. And, that's why I have no problem splitting the parties, because to me, that's just different scenes that are happening at any given time. I mean, as a DM, it's my job to bring them back together at some point. And it, as that isn't too difficult depending on the situation that you're currently in. I mean, if they're in completely separate towns, then obviously that's something, but A quick scene cut can change the focus, and that dominant player is no longer there, so you can do that. In terms of shy players or players that are just trying to work out where they fit at the table, I think there's extreme importance in session 0 to get a sense of what do these players like, what kind of tropes are they into, all of those kind of things, because they don't know what they want to explore at the table. All they've heard is, here's this world that's made up, it's collaborative storytelling, and I can do anything that I want. That's, for a new player or a shy player, that can be extremely intimidating at times. And how do you actually jump into the game at that point and kind of latch onto something? So I typically plop things down, just little tiny things that they can rub up against for a second. Get them asking questions first before you have them role playing in any way, shape, or form. Get them intrigued. Get them get them involved in the game a little bit more with a magic item that they might be interested in, or a storyline that they might be interested in, or a trope that they want to do. Any player is going to tell you specifically what they're looking for. They just won't do it directly. So you really have to listen to your players from that perspective, and then give them little bits and pieces where they can, again, rub up against it, and the minute that they start talking, that's what's going to start them opening them up at the table. And the more that they're in talking, and they might not do role-playing right at the beginning, they might just be inquiring and asking questions, and eventually you want to respond to them in-game as their character. And they'll start learning, oh, this is what role-playing is. And they'll just kind of get out to their shell. If they're comfortable within the setting, then they're going to open up faster, and they're going to invest more into the game in terms of their role-playing.
Yeah, modeling it. Model what you'd like to see. Model those behaviors.
Yeah. No, exactly. I've got a quick question here from our good friend Six of Spades, our channel artist. Highly recommend checking him out on all the socials, but he asked, has anyone pointed out that all DMs have the same haircut? We actually planned this out beforehand to go get the same haircut. Big announcement, guys. We're actually starting a boy band. We're still working on a name. So any suggestions in chat, if you have a suggestion for our boy
personally,
band.
I like DMD as the band name.
I love it. What does the last D stand for?
Disappointment, most likely.
Dungeon Master Disappointment.
Yeah. That's I was thinking,
I'm rocking the standard COVID haircut.
Oh yeah. I was thinking maybe DM Dreamboats, the Dungeon Master Dreamboats. I think that's a good one for us hunky pieces of eye candy on screen right now.
Dungeon Master Disasters.
That's probably
I like that.
A little bit closer. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, I think that one element I would like to dive into that we've kind of touched on a little bit, and this is a good segue to it, kind of in terms of our haircuts and where the world is at this point in time, and Mike just chatted out a little bit about it, is virtual gaming. Obviously, it's been a big change over the last year. There's been a lot of difficulties that have come up, but I think just overall the D&D community has done a pretty amazing job in terms of adapting to that relatively quickly. So I want to turn it over to Mike first, because he is kind of a subject expert on it at this point, being our resident I was about to say con artist, but that's probably not the way I want to talk. Yeah, he's our resident con man. No, he's definitely more in tune.
I'm a professional con man.
Okay, that's a good title to. So, being an individual who's run, in life cons versus having to now change it into the virtual cons, what do you see as the challenges that we're facing, and some of the pros versus cons of what it's like running virtual tabletop?
Well, I mean, I've been running online for years, and I started with GaryCon because I was running a Discord server as a fan, and we were, just people who were technologically into it. And then last year, things were looking real weird right around February, and everyone's like, this is scary. And we got into March, and then 2 weeks before we were supposed to have GaryCon 12, the powers that be decided we were doing virtual, and they're like, well, where do we do this? And I'm like, we have the Discord server already. And they all just jumped in, and we made it work in 2 weeks, which was astounding.
That's amazing. Yeah.
But the biggest problem we've run into is familiarity. There's so many great virtual tabletops out there. From Fantasy Grounds Unity to like Forge to even Roll20, the classic, the standby. But the biggest issue we run into is a lot of people are not comfortable learning an entirely new system for something, and it can be daunting. It can be distracting if you haven't learned it. And one of the things I'd like to shout out there is a lot of the companies, not just like the ones that make the VTTs, the virtual tabletops, but also a lot of the companies that make content are actually running games virtually on a regular basis through organized play. I know Frog God Games is a good one for that, where they will teach you to use like Foundry, or they will teach you to use like Fantasy Grounds College will teach people to use Fantasy Grounds. So if you're not comfortable and you don't necessarily want to jump into a campaign, you can play these one-shots with people who are willing to teach you how to use this to make you more comfortable. But the other thing is, it doesn't have to have the maps and the tokens and all of that. I literally run mine with Google Slides, and the people can move their character around, and a lot of it's done theater of the mind. And the big thing is that we still want to play, we still want to be together, we still want to enjoy the storytelling, and there's no reason that we have to give that up just because we can't be in person anymore. In fact, my wallet actually appreciates not going through the vendor hall. Yeah. The gaming is there, and people want to help you play. Like, we love playing D&D, and every convention has a group of people who are help desking or helping people get to where they need to be. And honestly, the one thing that us as a convention has looked at, because we run GaryCon and we run Autumn Revel, and we do Founders and Legends tournament and a bunch of other stuff. And the big thing we've seen is that once this is over, we're still going to be running virtual cons. It's going to be congruent. It's going to run parallel with our regular in-person cons, but they're still going to be there because there's a need, a niche. There's people who maybe can't fly to Wisconsin every year because it costs $1,200, and they want to participate. And that's a chance where we can do this. And I don't think it's going away. But I think that people just need to take the time to become comfortable. And if they want to become comfortable, reach out. Somebody's always willing to help them somewhere.
Yeah, no, and just to jump in for a second, if any of the viewers aren't already subscribed or part of the GaryCon Discord channel, highly recommend going and checking it out. It's as much as we all have kind of our own independent Discords. I think that something like GaryCon is such a great resource for those who want to get more involved with not only the community, but helping to find games and participate in anything along those lines. Plus, you get great announcements of the upcoming cons. As many of you know, is that GaryCon, I think, is now the second largest D&D convention in the world, set aside from Gen Con. So it's a phenomenal resource. Highly recommend it. Discord GaryCon, check it out, please and thank you.
We also play where Gen Con started. Gen Con started in Lake Geneva 51 years ago by Gary Gygax as a way to get together. It was the Geneva Gaming Convention. That's where Gen comes from.
Oh, that's where the Gen
comes from. It was a way so that,
okay.
Yeah, that's where Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax met each other, and they found this cool thing called chainmail, and they're like, this would be neat. What if we did more with it?
Yeah, it's and to be honest, and I'm not going to harp on it for too long, but I really love what GaryCon is doing in terms of allowing this whole virtual conference to happen, because you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been to GaryCon in the past live. I've been to Gen Con in the past live. It is a relatively expensive endeavor because I'm up in the great sandy white beaches of Canada. So for me, it takes a little while. But in terms of for everybody who's over the pond and anything along those lines, to have those outlets where you can go and really immerse yourself in a bit of that kind of convention manner, I just think it's absolutely wonderful. So thank you, Mike, and the rest of your team for continuing to put this stuff on. I think it's important that we still have these kind of things that we can kind of anchor ourselves to in such strange times. But with that said, I'd like to, I'd like to pass it over to our other panelists in terms of how have you guys kind of adjusted your games to the whole idea of virtual tabletop?
Well, we used to play in person exclusively before COVID hit. And then we made the shift to Roll20 initially, which we had a couple sessions that went pretty well, and then I was like, okay, well, since it's got all these options, I want to build in this big map and like do all the things, and I just found it wasn't working for me. What worked for me personally didn't work once the group was there. I'm not bashing Roll20 in any way. What I tried to accomplish didn't work. So I did a lot of research, and people were talking about Fantasy Grounds, and I was curious, but I looked at the upfront investment and I thought there's no way I'm sinking that kind of money, especially when I have to buy all the books again in digital form. And then a Steam sale hit. And I was able to pick up everything for like, including the unlimited lifelong license for like a little over $100. Wow. And
yeah, that's a good deal.
So I jumped on it, and I love it. I mean, it's got a lot of functionality to it. It was a bit of a learning curve for both me and the players. And we still have some technical problems from time to time. It's not perfect by any means. But one of the things that I really love about it is that it automates a lot of stuff for me. And as a DM, I can't appreciate that enough. When you're running several characters on the table and you've got so many things to worry about, targeting things and like rolling so many dice and calculating and DCs and everything like that. The fact that it will just be like, yeah, that hit, and yes, this is the damage, and it's already applied to that creature, that makes my life so much easier. And it's the little... I think that it's got a lot of great functions and a lot of great features, but it's those little quality of life aspects of Fantasy Grounds. And for the record, I am also not sponsored in any way. They didn't give me any money
yet.
But
keyword.
they don't even know I exist. But I feel like the little quality of life things that it introduces to running a game makes any glitches or issues that I have with it worthwhile. And so I haven't looked back from there. I haven't gone to the Unity version yet because it's still pretty new, and I'm like, let's give them time to work out all the kinks. But I'm using the classic version, and I really like it. I also picked up a digital map maker off Steam called Dungeon Painter Studio, which if you're careful about the resources, because we're streaming now, and you can't just use people's assets and stuff without consent and everything. But if you're careful about which assets you download off the Steam Workshop and whatnot, you absolutely can put together a huge repertoire of textures and objects and everything else to make amazing maps. I love our maps. I'm not an artist. I can't pen and paper out a map that looks good. But when people just give me thousands of things to work with that already look good by themselves, it makes my life so much easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jasper, what about you? What kind of utilities are you using in terms of the virtual world, and how has that affected your game overall?
Yeah, so I've been listening to the stories of Mike and Shanks, and they're quite two different stories, and I think ours is somewhere in the middle. We're using, we are searching our community online now, and we're doing that as Voidcast. But I'm also a personal dungeon master who's trying to think of ways how to interact with his players that were normally at the table. And so for them, I'm mixing. I've done little in the aspects of Roll20 and everything, but I have mixed putting up a second camera and putting on battle maps with figurines on them, and I share that on the Discord. But then with VoidcastLive, as Shanks said, it's really difficult to use materials that are from other people, and you have to think of all the licenses and everything. So we have a great in-house artist called Herr Stefes or Erik, and he does all the art for our maps and everything, and we do implement that in Roll20, which is our backbone for our online battles. But then we are also started experimenting again with Theater of Mind, which I love because it's so free, and you have to have a DM that really gets the hang of that. And then in the end, it's just like with the books, there are all these Dungeons and Dragons books, and they are filled with knowledge and statistics and rules and everything, but it comes down to the role-playing part, which isn't in the books, or it's described on how you should do it, but the role-playing itself isn't in the books. And that's the same across every media. Although the positive thing that has come out of streaming is that you have to wait for others to finish what they're saying, and then you start talking instead of all. Attention is really big part of the online community, and I like that very much because that's very different than at the table. But it's the role playing that makes the real difference in every game you are playing, and I think that's evolving as it was around the table. You're getting better at it every day. You're getting better at it with people you haven't played with because you've met them because they're on the other side of the world. And you're getting better at it because you're really starting to pay attention to others and everything. And that's where I think things like Discord or Zoom or any of these things are really the thing that made the difference, that we are able to do this in this period, because seeing each other's faces in such high quality and experiencing this together over stable internet connection is what you couldn't have imagined, I think, not even 5 years ago. And you could have done it then, but not at this stable level and this quality and with these kind of supporting things like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds to make it into a bigger experience than ever before. So that's what it's been for me.
Yeah. No, I would tend to agree with everyone and what they've said so far. I think that to a certain extent, it is new skills that you've had to learn in terms of kind of adapting to the technology that's out there. We've all kind of struggled with our particular platforms that we're using, whether it's whether it's a Roll20 or whether it's a Fantasy Grounds or anything along those lines. But I think it does bring new elements to the table that we've all kind of hit on in terms of making things a little bit easier for us once we've figured it all out. Me personally, I prefer the theater of the mind. So as long as I have the Zoom call, it kind of works out for me, and I try and focus so that for the most part, all I'm using the virtual tabletop platform for is battle maps at this point. But one thing that I've been playing with in the last little while, and it's probably still a ways off, there's from Steam, there's a program called Virtual Tabletop where it creates like a 3D element of the board itself, and that supports VR. So to me, if you can get to a point of where you can actually have a virtual reality of your game, where you're actually walking around within the context and visually seeing all of the things. And granted, there's a ton of modeling that needs to get done behind all that, but I'm very interested to see what the future of tabletop online and the technologies behind it turn into, because I think that and virtual chat bring a whole new credence. Sorry, Mike, go ahead, buddy.
Well, no, I'm actually I love the idea, and I was actually saying something to one of the people in the chat that I actually tried building a VR thing, but I actually have to go the other way because I have players who can only play on their phone, and for them, VR is not an option. In fact, having a Zoom call and being able to play and being able to roll the dice is not something they can all do. So I try to aim my game as low as I can for to accommodate the most amount of people, because it's unfortunately not everyone has all of those things. So I mean, I have a VR headset over there. I'm not going to name it because I'm not sponsored by them, but I have a common VR headset, and it's I would love it, but I also want to make sure that it stays accessible to everybody, because one of the greatest things of gaming is that you just need a dice, or you didn't even need dice. One person needed dice, and you just needed to show up.
Yeah, it's I think that I agree with the extent of there's clearly two different paths in terms of the ways of thinking behind it, and I'm not saying that you have to prescribe to one over the other. I think they're both. I would love to get back to in-game person gaming, having people around my table, having that little tiny Google Home speaker in the center of your table, broadcasting a little bit of background music. There's an intimacy to it that you can't get in any other way. But I think in terms of the way that things are going with the technology, I'd be very interested to see, specifically with tabletop gaming, I think it's only a matter of time before the big gaming studios like Square Enix and things along those lines finally really see, hey, here's what D&D could be. I mean, the new Baldur's Gate that's coming out is... Apparently there is a DM mode within it where you can actually DM a game and create the quests and everything behind it specifically in-game, and then have your players interact from that perspective, which I think is just, it's a very interesting concept in terms of what does tabletop gaming look like in the future.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, highly check it. I think Divinity Sin as well does the same thing. You can kind of do
Divinity
the
Original
DM
Sin.
mode. That's it. Yeah. So it's interesting to see. It's interesting to see where everybody goes with all of that kind of stuff. We have one more question.
But still,
from
the biggest fantasy machine is in your head. We really have to remember that part, because. That's the problem I always have with worked out graphics, is that they sometimes stump your imagination, because you are thinking on a bigger scale or a more different scale than the designers of a video game, and then it just doesn't compute. And so theater of mind and talking about the stuff you're experiencing, I think, is still the main thing, because in the end you're still using props otherwise that don't really subscribe to your fantastic mind.
Yeah, you do have to have the. I 100% agree with you on that in terms of you really need the idea first before you can actually build the product, if you will. Saying that the product is the table or the adventure that you're working on. If you're going to use things like visual aids of any kind, you have to know what it is first, or else you're absolutely right. You're going to start confining yourself in terms of, well, I have to build within the context of this framework kind of thing, and it does limit you from that perspective. So I think you're absolutely right in that you have to really find that balance of, what should be theater of the mind and what should stay as theater of the mind, and how can I use the technological assets that are given to me throughout the world to complement and enhance my game rather than take over my game.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We do have another question that's come in. Do you find as a teacher or pacing becomes more... do you find as a teacher pacing comes more naturally? I have found as I have learned from more teaching styles, I can pace D&D better as I know how to think in terms of lesson plans, aims, and objectives. And for those who are teachers around the table, I think it's a good question. But for those who aren't on the panel, who are teachers, let's just quickly talk about pacing for a second within the context of the game, because I think that that's such an important aspect of the game that we haven't touched on really yet today. Mike, considering that you were a teacher or are a teacher, what are your thoughts around pacing? Why is it so important to both D&D and teaching?
Well, don't hate me, but I'm actually an administrator now.
How do I kick him out of the call? Hold on, guys. Don't worry,
yeah.
Chad. I'm gonna kick this guy out right now. No, I'm just kidding.
Pacing is, honestly, pacing is in the hands of the players as best I can with my gaming, because if they engage with something, I'm going to let them go deep into it. And that's where when we're talking about world building in general, that's where the real world building begins. When people want details, they want history, they want backstory. How did it get here? Why is it here? The real question I want to know is, why is everybody leaving puzzles everywhere? Like, what age was that people were just creating puzzles and just leaving them scattered throughout the world?
Yeah.
But it's just like in education. There's some times where I think something's going to be quick or it's going to be long, and there's always that one person like, okay, I'm done. What next? And it's like other times it's something like they spend hours. And sometimes it's just as silly as them spending an hour figuring out which direction they're going to go next. And I'm going to let them work it all out. I try to do my best to not influence them by saying, or you could do this, when they're in the middle of making a decision, and then it just spurs them further. But I let them set the pacing as best I can. And then I just try to be prepared for whatever direction they go, because no matter what it is I think they're going to do, it's never that.
That is the truth. That is the absolute truth. Shanks, what do you think about pacing?
I hate to just kind of repeat what Mike just said, but players got to set the pace. Now, I'd say that's accurate for like 90%. Every once in a while, you have to spur your players a little bit. I don't have to very often, but every once in a while they get stuck on one thing, or they get into a cyclical kind of conversation, or they're still pestering an NPC who has literally got nothing else to offer them. And it's super rare, and it's just kind of like, okay, so moving on, and just kind of, I don't be like, now you have to accomplish all these things by the end of the session or anything. It's just a matter of every once in a while, you just have to push them out the door a little bit. But players got to set their own pace. It goes back to that earlier question of how you keep them engaged. Let them explore what they want to explore in the way they want to.
Yeah. Jasper, what do you think about pacing?
About the same. And the thing is that players are slow. So you have time as a dungeon master to listen to them very carefully and decide what to do next as well, because they're really giving you the time at the table to prepare for what's coming up next. I lately had a session where I didn't go in that prepared because I had a busy week, and then while they were exploring stuff, I had time to develop a legendary encounter while they were going through the dungeon, so to say. And it was a very exciting encounter as well, and they had no idea. But that's because they decide the pace, and you can react to that. So it gives you DM time as well. That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not much more that I can add to what's already been said, but I think that one element of pacing that is not only true to D&D, but for storytelling in general as well, is that as a DM, it's good to utilize pacing as a measurement of tension. That to me is very important in terms of how to move your players along a little bit further. Yeah, let them brush up on anything, let them explore it, everything along those lines. But at some point in time, you have to move things forward, or it's going to start getting stale, and then the player investment and engagement is going to drop off. So if you can utilize your pacing, whether it be through a timing perspective, whether just naturally having something happen that kicks it up a little bit, You can build like a little bit of tension, and that's going to, if you can build tension, that is going to build so much more player agency than any backstory elements that you can ever put in it. You put someone in the hot seat, they're going to immediately engage more so than they probably have in the past, kind of thing. So that's how I like to utilize pacing within my game. Let the players do whatever they want, but when it becomes a critical moment, ratchet up that tension, and you can ratchet up the pacing so you can ratchet up that tension for after the fact. And whether that be, a Kraken that attacks them within 5 minutes of starting your campaign, or a baby popping out of a crystal at the end of an end of adventure. There's different things that you can do. I think that I think that pretty much covers the pacing aspect, and I think we're going to take one more question before we call it, because we're almost at the 2.5 hour mark, and I don't want to take these guys' time up too much longer. Last question is actually from one of the Careful Cantrip cast members. How do you navigate the situation when the objectives of the players are different or at odds? Very interesting question.
Can I answer that, Dave?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's the life butter of a dungeon master. That's the thing you navigate, because those things make for the most fun aspects of being a dungeon master, reacting to that kind of stuff and being at odds. And the only thing you have to do is that at the end of the day you have to say it's a cooperative game, so please don't destroy it, but work towards an end that makes sense. But being at odds, being in conflict with the main story goal, that's the most fun you can have as a dungeon master, and I think in that regard as a player as well.
Good point.
Yeah, to add on to that, see, I kind of hinted towards this a little bit with how I initiate the story in having them all start with some sort of common goal. They're all invested in one thing. Now, it might be something that lasts the duration of the entire campaign. It might be something that is over by session 2. But they've at least had that common ground. Now, going forward, when new things come up, if they actually end up at odds, where it's like, no, my goal is different from yours, not just my motivation, but my goals are different from your goals, then you need to talk to the players a little bit and say, okay, yeah, no, absolutely. Your character wants to go east and conquer the dragon, and your character wants to go west and sail off to another continent. Here's the thing. Do you keep adventuring together? Because if the goal here is to play cooperatively and to adventure together, then you're going to have to find common ground. You're going to have to compromise, and you're going to have to find a way for your characters to do that in a way that fits the narrative. And if they can't, then it probably means that one or more characters is leaving the campaign. And that's okay too. The players don't have to necessarily be locked into one character. Mm-hmm. And maybe they'll return in the future, maybe they won't. You never know. But if you feel like you've designed a character that at this point would not cooperate with what the rest of the party wishes, then you have to be willing to say, okay, they leave the party.
And I think in both cases you've learned something about yourself as well. Then,
yeah, absolutely.
Mike, thoughts?
There's always a third option, which you just say, rocks fall, everyone dies.
But are you talking about stones or the birds?
Anything.
Rocks.
No, I mean, in reality, the handful of times I've run into it, because I do my best to set my expectations for player intent, but there are times where it really does come up as important. And I think that every time it's been resolved, it's come down to the person who has the most the conflict, when there's two choices where there's no way to split the middle. It comes down to the person who feels their reason deeply and is as important enough to sway the group, and the other person has to say, okay, I may want this, but it's just like any relationship where you sometimes put aside the things you want for the overall health of the group, and you just say, okay, yes, I may not have it this time, but I'm going to go with you guys because I like being a part of this.
Yeah, that's and I've mentioned this both on this show as well as when I was on Talking Void, Voidcast's talk show. For me, it's the most important thing you can do as a DM to start any campaign is build the relationship between the characters. If you're building that relationship first and foremost, then that will lend credence to any options that happen after the fact. Because if you can make them a solid team or a group, then it's just a matter of patience to say, okay, your character wants to do this now, another character wants to do something later, and they're willing to stay together to see all of it through. I have a bit of a context in terms of what I play. I don't know if that's the right wording that I'm using there, but essentially whenever I start a campaign, I put the players in the absolute worst position possible. My last one, our very first game, I threw them into the blood war of Avernus. And that's how the campaign started. I literally, your wagon is tumbling down this crevice into the depths of hell. There's demons battling all around you. Go. Nothing, it was no don't start in a tavern or anything along those lines. And it's the same with the campaign that we're running now. Very first thing I did, you're on a ship, a kraken attacks you. What are you doing? And by doing that and putting them into these kind of positions, it forces them into a team building activity right off the hop. And I generally like to say that levels 1 to 3 are usually useless in terms of for individual characters. They want to get to that subclass as quickly as possible so that they can start expanding from there. A lot of people have turned around and said, we'll just start the campaign at level 3, which I would tend to agree with in some things, but level 1s to 3, you have this opportunity as a DM to really build the foundation of the party itself together. They're not going to be high level, they're going to be very squishy, so now all of a sudden you force people to have to rely on each other in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, and you build that bond between the party. And as soon as you have that bond built, then it doesn't really matter if they have different ideals about what they want to go do or anything along those lines. Then it's just a matter of a quick conversation out of game to say, listen, I know you guys all want to go do this, and with a little bit of patience, we're going to touch all of those subjects. If you're not, if you're not loose enough as a DM to allow them to go explore all those kind of things and go off script for a little while and go off plot for a little while, then you really have to kind of look at it and say, what can I do as a DM better? Because your players should have the ability to go off track completely, and then it's your job as the DM to bring them back to the plot if you decide to keep going that way. You might make an entirely new plot. I mean, I'll be completely honest, at the end of our last game, our players just wanted to pull a crystal out of a mountain. So what did I do? I had a baby be birthed out of the crystal. I have no idea why I did that. I have no idea how what we're going to do with all of that. But if they take an interest in that baby, then I have some ideas around that of how I can build that into my plot. Make your plot manageable rather than trying to force your players to make decisions that railroad them that way. And that's the best piece of advice I can give as a DM is make sure that you're loose enough to say, yeah, I had this idea for the campaign. I thought it was super cool, all of those kind of things. But now I'm throwing it all out the window because I know now what type of game my players want to play. And I want them to invest and I want them to enjoy themselves, because to me as a DM, there's nothing more important than my players having a good time. And whatever story I'm telling will always be at the back burner of all of that.
I'd love to tack on to both things you've said, actually. Levels 1 and 2 as a player are frustrating for everyone. It's not that it's not fun. You don't think so, Jasper?
No, I don't. I think they're the most fun levels.
Fair enough. I find it frustrating as a player a lot of the time because it's like I can't really do much yet. But I think they're super valuable as a group, as a party, in learning to rely on each other. I think that's really what they are best at accomplishing, is teaching a party that you have to lean on each other. Not that I still think they're fun. I just think that they're frustrating, for the record. But as for the world building thing that you mentioned afterwards, if you have a plot line that you intended to go down and your players chase a different thread to a completely different place, that's okay. Write something else up, adapt to that. But then the consequences of them abandoning this other plot thread should be apparent in the world. They come back a month later, and some other heroes have made a name for themselves, conquering the orcs that were going to terrorize the village. Or maybe the village isn't ruined. Maybe it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore.
Actions have consequences.
Exactly. Yeah. As long as the world is real and lived in, it doesn't matter which thing they're chasing.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's a term where people are essentially, they think they're the hero of their own story, and they personal fable is the term, and they think that everyone that they talk to, when they leave their vision, just goes away and waits for them to talk to them again. And a lot of players think of that in D&D, but the world does have consequences, and the world changes. I mean, sometimes things that you don't even anticipate end up creating a thing. Like, for example, you guys, your players defeated the big bad in the swamp. Well, now they're expanding and turning it into a theme park because the swamp is safe.
Yep. That's one way. Yeah. So I mean, just remember that it's the player's story, but the world lives on without them. There's a perfect example of that that's on television right now that everybody can relate to is the Mandalorian. I think that is one of the best D&D campaigns televised I have ever seen. And the reason for that being is that the Mandalorian could care less about what's happening in the universe. He wants his baby friend, and that's all he really cares about at this point. You've seen elements of the other Mandalorians coming in, saying that there's this big thing that's happening. You have to go back to the home planet. You've got the Dooku guy, or whatever his name is, who he's plotting and scheming. You can tell there's a living, breathing world outside of the Mandalorian, but the show focuses on the Mandalorian. That is a perfect D&D campaign in my mind, is that you've got all of these things happening outside of it, and when the players want to rub up against it, they can, but it doesn't necessarily have to follow, they don't have to follow it to enjoy the story that you're telling with them.
Same with The Expanse. Does that as well.
Yeah. So, but with that said, I think we're going to wrap up our panel. We've gone a little bit over. We've gone over a little bit over our time, but I think it was well worth it. And there was some very, very interesting things that we can all think about in terms of how to adjust our games. And I love bringing people together like this because having separate mindsets of the same type of context. You get such great inspiration. I mean, I already have things that I want to think about that some of our guests have mentioned today. So, with that said, I'm going to turn it over to each of them momentarily, so they can let you know where you can find them, what they're working on, all of those kind of things. So, Mike, if you want to take it away, let us know where we can find you and kind of the stuff that we can look forward to from you.
I apologize, I'm going to be a little bit long-winded for a second, but that's because I want to pitch a world-building thing to everybody. Gary Kahn is running a contest called The Crucible, where we've had Luke Gygax, the son of Gary Gygax, write a story starter, and we've invited everyone to create their own 4-hour module based on it, and then run it at GaryCon. And we will be having those modules judged by a panel of experts, including such wonderful people as Satine Phoenix, who many of you know, but also, as I'm quickly dragging up the promo so I have the names, Tim Kask, who is one of the original creators of D&D. He was, I believe, the first employee that they hired when they created TSR. Chris Clark, who's a great game designer. Luke Gygax himself will be judging it. And Stephen Radney McFarland, who's another great designer who's worked for Paizo and Wizards of the Coast and all that. So if you want to have your work read and judged by people who've influenced and created the game, or you just want to create a really fun module to run at a convention, check it out through the GaryCon website and be a part of making history. Plus, the first prize gets a year of World Anvil. So if you're interested in world building, you also get a cash prize, and there's a potential you could get published. So there's that. As for me, I'm not very interesting. I'm just a Gary Con person.
Where can we find the entry form, or where do we go to sign up for something like that?
Sure. We've been blasting it out on all the social medias if you search for GaryCon, as well as our website, garycon.com. We're very creative in our naming. So.
So I mean, I'm definitely going to be writing for the module and entering that. You guys can keep the cash prize. I just want the World Anvil membership. Just give me that, and I'm good to go for all of that.
I do believe we also have a statue. There's also a trophy.
Okay.
Trophies
are good. Trophies are good. Now definitely the trophy and World Anvil. I'll take those. Everything else, no problem. But yes, highly recommend it. If you haven't gone and bought your tickets for GaryCon already, head over to GaryCon right now. Help support them. It's a critical time for all of us and we need to support each other in terms of the D&D community. So make sure you go over there and find a way that you can be a part of GaryCon the best that you possibly can.
Yeah, I mean, the ticket also comes with $20 of free Frog God merch, so your ticket pays for itself.
Guys, what more could you ask for? This is what we give you.
Sorry, I'm a shill.
That's okay. Jasper, tell us what you're working on and where we can find you.
So I'm Jasper from VoidcastLive. You know that by now. You can find us on Twitch, on YouTube, and everywhere. Tomorrow will be the 19th episode of the Precipice of Dreams, which is our actual play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons campaign. And we are at such an amazing spot in the adventure. I'm being eaten right now, so that's a thing. And I don't know if I will survive, but let's see what happens. Then on Tuesdays we do. I have my Jasper's laboratory. So Jonah's there. It's at 9 p.m. CET, and there I help. It will be the 3rd episode, and I'm just doing not adventure preparation stuff. So how do you prepare for a session, so to say? And then I have my Talking Void talk show the other week at 9 p.m. CET, and Mike will be on our show as well at the 2nd of March, and looking very much forward to that. And we'll be discussing things from GaryCon, of course, but also what's the silliest build you've ever made. So that will be fun, I think. And then we have our Let's Play parallel projections on the other Monday from our Precipice of Dreams adventure, and there we do Let's Play from video games that we enjoy very much, and Michelle is the one who does that the most. And yeah, it's really fun to see him go through these amazing games that are out there. So that's my VoidcastLive pitch. And looking very forward to have Mike on Talking Void. Yeah.
I just want to say, in terms of Voidcast has been a longtime friend of Careful Cantrips, almost since we originally started. If you're looking for just consistently good content for D&D, whether it's gameplay, information, talking about it, all those kind of things, highly recommend going and checking them out. You can go to their Twitch channel right now and give them a follow, and if you really, really like them, maybe use your Prime sub to go ahead and support them the best that you can from that perspective. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to our... I try. I'm a shill too, so moving over to Shanks. I'm glad that I have you on today because I really want to harass you a little bit about knowing some of the upcoming plans of what we can see with our good friends over at Top Down.
Yeah, so in our stream last night, we've been streaming every second Saturday. We announced that coming in March, we're going to be streaming a little bit more. So I'm not at liberty to discuss too much just yet. Wizards of Zakaria will continue to be bi-weekly, but the other Saturdays are going to be occupied by some other content. And we're also going to find some weekdays that fit for us, and try to get more regular in the community, give you more content to sink your teeth into. Some of it's I'll just let you find out on social media. So it's TopDownTabletop. We're on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. I don't know. I don't manage our social media, but it's all out there. Check us out. We also have a Discord channel, much like Careful Cantrip and these other gentlemen, I'm sure. We'd love to have you take part in the community and get in touch with us, ask us questions, give us advice, because we're still really new.
Yeah, I tried my best to get more information from him. He just wasn't. The guy is like a ironclad vault. I'm trying to find out what this additional content is. But you're too good, my friend.
Call him an
Shanks,
Iron Maiden.
Yeah,
it's DM discipline, right? Even when you're excited
much.
about something, you don't tell anyone because you're the DM and you can't ruin it.
For years and years.
No, but if you're not following Tabletop, they're so close to that affiliate status. Just go help them out. Go sub or follow them right now. Let's get them up to the mark that they need to get to as quickly as possible. So let's get those get over there. Follow right now. Please, thank you. It's the only thing I'm going to ask for this week from Careful Cantrip.
We're so grateful for you, Dave. You're amazing.
No, I just look good on camera. Anyway.
It's the beard.
It's the beard. Yeah. So anyway, again, from all of us at Careful Cantrips, thank you so much for the continued support. For all of those who have stuck around with us, I promise next week we're going to get back to our typical world building. We do have our first official, unofficial source material, which was the monster that we built last week, the Grizzalk. You can find that on Reddit and on our Discord channel, and I'm sure we spread it out through our social media, whatever the case is. It's a CR15 beast. That's a plant, kind of a combination of like a hulking creature combined with an elder evil. So go check it out. I'm really proud of what me and the community have done with that. So and it's free to everybody. So go ahead if you're looking for a higher level monster, go and check that out. But we'll be returning back to our normal world building schedule next week. Same bat time, same Twitch channel. And of course, if you want to check out our dumb faces on our regular campaign night, that happens on Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, right here. And it looks like we're pretty close to summoning Wilburo, guys. So if you haven't used your channel points already, highly recommend putting it towards that, because got something real special for that coming up. Anyway, again, thank you so much for everybody joining us today. Hopefully you've had a great time. Find us all on our socials and Discords and all that kind of stuff. And if there's something you'd like to you'd like us to answer that we didn't have a chance to address today, I'm sure we'll all be willing to help you out on the Discords or the Reddits or whatever the case is there. Once again, thank you all of our guests for joining us. It's been a wonderful time. Thank you guys so much. Yeah, check them out on all of their stuff. Anyway, guys, we will see you in the next one. Thank you so much. We love your faces, and have a great week. Take care, guys.
Thank you, everyone.